There's a psalm that has echoed through generations like a whisper of comfort. It's read in the face of death, proclaimed in the midst of pain, and invoked when fear knocks at the door. Psalm 91 is known as the prayer of the protected. But what if we've only scratched the surface? What if, instead of just a shelter, it's a code, a spiritual survival map for the darkest times? Because the dwelling of the Most High is not just any shelter. It's not accessible to those who merely read about it, but to those who choose to abide. And abiding there comes at a cost. Behind those words is not empty comfort, it's confrontation. A revelation ignored for centuries. And today, if you're willing to listen, this truth could change everything you thought you knew about faith, protection, and the unseen world around us. My name is Malachi Themba, born in Mbombela, South Africa. I grew up surrounded by rituals, incantations, and silent pacts passed down through generations. As a young boy, I was introduced to what many call ancestral wisdom, but in reality, it was a system of spiritual deception. For an entire decade, I served alongside those who manipulated invisible forces, and I witnessed with my own eyes what few would ever believe. Those were years of darkness, years when the name of God was only a distant whisper to me. Until one day, facing death, I cried out, not for strength, not for revenge, but for mercy, and he answered. It was in the valley of death that I discovered Psalm 91 is not just a beautiful text or a wall decoration. It's a living code, a secret summons that only activates in those who choose to walk in truth, holiness, and communion. Today, at 41 years old, I can say without hesitation, there is a spiritual world operating far above everything we can see, and those who dwell in the shelter of the Most High no longer live in fear. Before we continue with this revelation, write in the comments which city or country you're watching this video from. I want to know how far this message is reaching hearts that are thirsty for truth. The truth is, Psalm 91 can't be accessed in a rush, nor revealed to distracted hearts. It doesn't respond to shallow curiosity, but to genuine thirst. That thirst is what pulled me out of the darkness. And crossing the line between deception and light, I realized something many still haven't. Psalm 91 is not a pocket charm. It's a sacred calling. For a long time, I saw people treat Psalm 91 like an automatic shield, a kind of Christian incantation. They'd leave it open on a nightstand, tape its verses on walls, or recite it loudly in moments of desperation, hoping the words alone would create an invisible force field of protection. But the psalm never promised that. It doesn't work like magic. It is a calling, and every calling requires a response. The very first line says it all. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High. It doesn't say he who visits, or he who reads, or he who occasionally prays. It says dwells. The word carries the weight of permanence, of constant intimacy, of daily commitment. Only those who live under God's shadow are protected, and to live there means renouncing comfort, dying to the flesh, abandoning spiritual laziness, and choosing daily surrender. This psalm was written for those who depend entirely on God, not as a last resort, but as their only source. That's why many never experience its real power. Because without realizing it, they're trying to activate eternal promises with temporary actions. The protection described in it is a result of covenant, not superstition. During my time in the occult, I learned that the spiritual world operates by legality. And the same is true in the kingdom of God. You only have access to what aligns with your spiritual position. If you're far from the presence of the Most High, repeating holy words won't help. Heaven doesn't respond to formulas. It moves at the cry of surrendered broken hearts. Psalm 91 is an invitation to a change in posture. It's as if God is saying, "Do you want to live under my shadow? Then come dwell in me. Trust more than you fear. Obey more than you question. Walk with me even when you don't understand. That's the secret almost no one dares to speak. The promises of deliverance, protection, honor, and salvation are not automatic. They are tied to a life of spiritual dwelling, not an empty statement of faith. And that's why, before trying to use Psalm 91 for protection, one must ask, am I willing to live within it? If Psalm 91 is a call to surrender and permanence, then the next question is inevitable. Where is this shelter of the Most High? How do we dwell in a place that can't be seen, touched, or found on a map? This is where many get lost, trying to enter with their bodies a place where only the Spirit can live. The word shelter in the original Hebrew holds far deeper meaning than we imagine. Its root is sether, which can also be translated as hidden refuge, secret region, or even veiled dimension. That changes everything. The shelter of the Most High is not a prayer corner in your home or a sacred temple location. It's a spiritual frequency, an invisible realm where only those who choose to live in spirit and truth can enter. This secret dwelling has no walls, but it does have standards, and the greatest of them is intimacy. Those who don't know God's voice, who live a mechanical, ritualistic faith, may repeat the entire psalm, but they'll still be outside. In the spiritual realm, everything operates through alignment. To be under the shadow of the Almighty is to be fully aligned with His heart. It means hiding not from problems, but in Him. It means making God the center, not the last option. It's living with the knowledge that there is no greater safety than the presence of the Creator. During my years in the occult, I learned that there are spiritual dimensions that can only be accessed through total surrender. That holds true both in darkness and in the kingdom of God. The shelter of the Most High is that kind of dimension. You don't enter it in a rush, through religion or out of fear. You enter through living faith, repentance, and a desire to stay. That's why for many Psalm 91 sounds beautiful, but it never manifests. Because it's encoded to activate only in those who cross the veil of superficiality and choose to live within the secret. It's in the secret that character is formed. It's in the secret that fear is defeated. It's in the secret that deliverance happens before the attack even comes. The shelter is not a location, it's a relationship, and only those who choose to make God their dwelling, not their weekly visit, live there. Those who don't understand what the shelter of the Most High truly is tend to see Psalm 91 as a beautiful poem or a symbolic promise. But those who choose to dwell in that secret place begin to perceive what many do not. Hidden within it is a spiritual map drawn to guide the children of God through chaos. And this map doesn't only speak of protection, it announces signs, exposes traps, and prepares warnings for the final days. Each verse in Psalm 91 carries a vivid image, a powerful metaphor, but also a prophetic warning. When the text speaks of plagues that walk in darkness, arrows that fly by day, night terrors, or hidden snares, it's not merely describing natural dangers. It refers to a pattern of spiritual attacks that will increase in the days leading up to Christ's return. Notice how the text is structured. First, it points to subtle and silent threats, like the fowler's snare, a discreet, almost invisible trap. Then it mentions invisible terrors of the night, followed by open assaults, like arrows and plagues, that take down thousands. This isn't random. This progression represents the increasing intensity of tribulation. First comes deception, then fear, and finally, direct confrontation. This description aligns with what Jesus warned us in Matthew 24, that in the last days false prophets would arise. There would be rumors of wars, diseases, persecution, and apostasy. Psalm 91, then, reveals itself as a prophecy disguised as a prayer, not just to comfort, but to prepare God's people to endure. Every danger mentioned in the psalm has a spiritual counterpart. The plague, for example, points to global crises that spread collective fear, not just biological, but emotional and moral. The arrows represent sudden attacks, accusations, persecution, scandals that take down leaders and confuse entire churches. The night terror may represent mental, spiritual, and emotional attacks that intensify when the lights go out and the heart is tested. The question is, why would God include all of this in a psalm of protection? The answer is simple, because He doesn't just promise to deliver us, but to warn us in advance. This text is both a shelter and a beacon. It reveals what's coming and how we must position ourselves not to fall with those who can't discern the times. And most importantly, the psalm declares that 1,000 may fall at your side and 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. This is not about luck, it's about discernment. It's about being in the right place, the secret place, when the evil days come. When we realize that Psalm 91 is more than a poem of protection and actually contains strategic warnings for the final days, a new question arises. How did this knowledge remain hidden for so long? The answer lies in how the text was written. Its words are not merely literary, they are spiritual codes, and those who first understood this were the ancients. Ancient rabbis did not read Psalm 91 superficially. For them, every word carried weight, direction, and spiritual intention. The text was treated as a kind of spiritual warfare manual, disguised as a devotional prayer. They knew it held a combination of promises and instructions that, when properly understood, served as a defense against invisible forces, not just diseases and external dangers, but spiritual influences operating behind the scenes of the natural world. Words like dwell, refuge, shadow, and shelter were not decorative. Each carried a meaning that went beyond everyday language. For example, dwell in the original Hebrew, yashav, conveys the idea of establishing a permanent residence, not just passing through. It's a term used to describe ongoing habitation as one who claims territory. Refuge, mahseh, goes beyond the idea of a hiding place. It refers to a place of cover during active attacks. In other words, the protection described in Psalm 91 is not passive. It's a shelter that operates while conflict is happening. The phrase, shadow of the Almighty, Tzel Shaddai, represents a powerful figure of speech. A shadow can only exist if you're close enough to the source. So being under God's shadow means extreme closeness, nearly pressed into His presence. The ancients knew this intimacy couldn't be achieved through religious tradition, but through daily communion. That's why spiritual masters of the past saw this psalm as a call to a life immersed in the presence of God. They taught that the words shouldn't just be recited, but lived through the spiritual state they described. For them, the text was more than inspiration. It was spiritual discipline. This intentional coding acted as a filter. Only those who truly sought understanding, guided by the Spirit, could access the deeper layers of the message. The psalm therefore worked as a seal of progressive revelation. The more the heart surrendered, the more the text revealed itself. Today, the challenge remains the same. Are we merely reading or truly dwelling? Because the language of Psalm 91 does not respond to a curious mind, but to a surrendered spirit. As we go deeper into the spiritual structure of Psalm 91, we begin to see it wasn't written randomly. The choice of words like dwell, refuge, and shadow shows us there's a hidden logic in the text, a structure that goes beyond poetic language. But there's an even deeper level of revelation, the numerical code hidden in the Hebrew letters. This is where the ancient wisdom of gematria comes in. In Jewish tradition, gematria is an ancient method that assigns numerical values to each letter of the Hebrew alphabet, revealing hidden meanings and connections between words, concepts, and spiritual dimensions. For the ancient scribes and Torah scholars, no letter was placed in a sacred text by accident. Each number hidden within the words formed symbolic keys, capable of opening spiritual realities, both of understanding and divine intervention. In Psalm 91, the term Shaddai, translated as Almighty, is one of those keys. In Gematria, this word carries the numerical value of 314, but beyond the number itself, what stands out is the embedded spiritual meaning. Shaddai was the name written on the outside of the Israelites' doors as a sign of divine protection. It was also the name inscribed on the phylacteries worn on the forehead and arm by the most devout Jews. In other words, this name was not just a title, it was a spiritual seal of authority against the unseen. In the context of Psalm 91, invoking the name Shaddai is not simply referring to a powerful God. It is activating a frequency of protection. It is aligning oneself with a name that carries vibration, presence, and dominion over every hidden force. This is one of the secrets many read, but few understand. Another example, the word shelter, Seta, has the numerical value of 1660, which in rabbinic tradition is associated with protection from hidden evil, especially from silent and invisible attacks. This directly connects with the spiritual function of the psalm, to protect not only the body, but the spirit against snares the eyes cannot see. This ancient wisdom has nothing to do with cheap mysticism or superstitious numerology. It is a sacred spiritual language used by God to encode eternal truths within the very structure of the word. It's as if the text itself breathes, hiding instructions that only reveal themselves to those who seek more than comfort, those who seek communion. That's why Psalm 91 should not be read only with the eyes, but with a heart eager to interpret what lies behind each letter, each number, and each symbol. If every word in Psalm 91 carries a frequency and each letter hides a code, then we are not just speaking of a sacred text, but a spiritual technology, a field of activation that ignites when faith, surrender, and purpose are aligned. And this activation is not theoretical, it is real. I know this because I lived in the flesh what it means to be surrounded by this promise in the face of certain death. It happened in a rural region of Angola during an assignment involving rituals and spiritual pacts. At the time, I was still moving between two realities. Outwardly, I remained involved with occult practices. Inwardly, I was beginning to be stirred by something greater, something I could not yet name. I carried a small copy of Psalm 91 folded and hidden in my pocket, more out of habit than conviction, until the day of confrontation came. That night, we were surrounded. The conflict between armed groups and religious factions had intensified, and without warning, we were ambushed by armed men. Gunshots shattered the silence, screams, dust, panic. The first instinct was to run, but within seconds I realized there was nowhere to go. We were in an open field with no cover, no escape. At that moment, something different happened. Unlike other times when fear would paralyze me, a strange calm surrounded me. It didn't come from within me, but over me. I took out the crumpled paper, closed my eyes, and for the first time, with no bargaining, no pride, no resistance, I read those words with a bare, surrendered spirit. I didn't recite them, I cried out. I didn't repeat them, I confessed. He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. I don't understand how I came out of that night alive. The bullets pierced through windows, struck walls, shattered objects around me, but not one touched me. One of the men beside me fell. Another was wounded, and I, standing in the middle, walked away without a scratch. That was no coincidence. It was the word in motion. It was the manifestation of a shield that only activates when truth meets faith. Because Psalm 91 does not protect those who use it as a magic formula. It protects those who are broken enough to trust without reservations. Since that day, I've never seen that psalm the same way again. I understood that it is not a piece of decor for the wall. It is a covenant that reveals itself on the battlefield, and maybe that's exactly what the Spirit is saying to you right now. Stop just repeating. Start trusting with everything you are. As we reflect on the difference between dwelling and merely visiting the shelter of the Most High, it becomes clear that Psalm 91 is not an invitation for a casual visit, but a call to constant presence in God. This distinction is crucial to understanding the depth of the promises contained in this psalm. Psalm 91 is often remembered for its promises of protection and safety. However, when we look deeper, we see that it also serves as a manual of spiritual warfare, offering strategies to face the invisible challenges that threaten our faith and spiritual well-being. The verses of Psalm 91 describe a series of dangers: the fowler's snare, the deadly pestilence, night terror, the arrow that flies by day, the pestilence that stalks in darkness, and the plague that destroys at midday. These images are not merely literary. They represent real threats we face in our spiritual lives. The fowler's snare symbolizes the subtle traps that can lead us off the path of faith. The deadly pestilence represents the destructive influences that can contaminate our souls. The night terror and arrow that flies by day illustrate the unexpected attacks that can shake our trust in God. The pestilence that stalks in darkness and plague that destroys at midday reflect the crises that can arise in times of darkness as well as in broad daylight. Faced with these threats, Psalm 91 instructs us to remain firm in faith, trusting in divine protection. It reminds us that by dwelling in the shelter of the Most High and resting in the shadow of the Almighty, we are under God's constant care. Moreover, the psalm emphasizes the importance of calling upon the name of the Lord and fully trusting in His faithfulness. This trust is not passive. It requires total surrender and a life aligned with divine principles. By doing so, we not only find refuge, but also become active participants in the spiritual battle, equipped with God's armor to withstand the attacks of the enemy. Therefore, Psalm 91 is not just a promise of protection, but also a practical guide for spiritual warfare. It teaches us to recognize threats, to trust in God, and to live in a way that reflects that trust. As we internalize these lessons, we become prepared to face spiritual challenges with courage and unwavering faith. By understanding that Psalm 91 is not an amulet, but a call to dwell continually in the divine presence, we realize that this spiritual dwelling activates an invisible reality, the mobilization of angels on our behalf. Verse 11 of Psalm 91 declares, "For He will command His angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways." This is not a generic promise of protection, but a divine decree of combat. God commands His angels to intervene for those who dwell in the shelter of the Most High, not as a symbolic gesture, but as a strategic action in an ongoing spiritual war. Angels, as messengers and heavenly warriors, are assigned to protect and guide the faithful along their paths. This protection is not automatic. It is activated by the obedience and holiness of those who remain in God's presence. Those who live in constant communion with the Lord are the targets of this angelic guard, which operates in all aspects of their lives, from daily challenges to the most intense spiritual battles. It is important to understand that this divine order is not an invitation to recklessness. Even Jesus, when tempted by Satan, refused to test this promise of protection, showing that trust in God must be accompanied by wisdom and discernment. Thus, the presence of angels does not exempt us from acting responsibly, but assures us that as we follow God's ways, we will never be alone. The work of angels is an extension of God's care, reflecting His attention to the details of our lives. They are sent to guard us, to guide us, and, when necessary, to fight for us. This spiritual reality invites us to live in alignment with divine principles, aware that our obedience activates heavenly intervention. Therefore, By dwelling in the shelter of the Most High and living in obedience to His will, we activate not only divine protection, but also the mobilization of angels in our favor. This understanding challenges us to live in holiness and surrender, recognizing that we are engaged in a spiritual battle where the presence of angels is a manifestation of God's care and strategy to lead us to victory. If understanding the role of angels reminds us that God is actively guarding us, we must also accept a truth that is often ignored. There are dangers operating in the shadows, trying to draw us away from this path of protection. Psalm 91 does not hide this reality. It reveals with wisdom that the war is invisible, yet absolutely real. When the psalmist mentions the fowler's snare, he is not painting a bucolic scene or merely illustrating natural life difficulties. He is delivering a serious revelation about how the spiritual world works. The snare is a cleverly set trap, hidden from sight, designed precisely to capture those who walk without discernment. In the spiritual context, these snares are enemy strategies, crafted to trap unguarded souls. They do not come as open attacks, but in disguise, false doctrines that blend half-truth with deception, emotional attachments that drain your faith, and seemingly harmless situations that open breaches in your spirit. They are subtle poisons, distributed slowly until they paralyze prayer, genuine faith, and the passion for God's presence. And here lies one of the great warnings of Psalm 91. It's not enough to pray with your lips, you must live in the Spirit. A person can recite prayers daily, attend religious gatherings, and still be captured if they do not develop spiritual sensitivity to recognize the snares the enemy places along the way. The traps are silent. A relationship that seems blessed, but slowly weakens your pursuit of God. A job opportunity that brings wealth, but robs you of peace. A new philosophy, a new discourse that seems modern, but dilutes holiness into relativism. All of these are examples of snares, and those who lack discernment fall. Dwelling in the shelter of the Most High is also living in constant vigilance. The shelter is not only protection against open attack, it is refuge against veiled deception. God does not promise a path free of traps, but offers eyes trained by the Spirit to see where the enemy has tried to hide his nets. That is why it is vital to seek a life of true communion, where the voice of God is not a rare event, but a familiar sound. Those who walk in the light rarely stumble in the dark, and those who dwell in the secret place develop sensitivity to understand that not every beautiful path leads to life, and not every pleasant voice comes from the Father. The fowler's snare continues to be set day after day. But those who live hidden in the Most High walk with open eyes, a sober mind, and an aligned spirit, and so, when the snare tightens, it finds no prey. Discerning hidden traps is only the first step, because the battle we face goes beyond silent snares. It manifests in open, violent, and often devastating attacks. Psalm 91 not only exposes the hidden snares, it also announces the visible signs of the spiritual war that unfolds over us. The psalmist did not choose his words at random. When he mentions the arrow that flies by day and the pestilence that stalks in darkness, he is describing two distinct dynamics of spiritual attack. One is fast and direct, the other silent and corrosive. Both, however, have tangible, palpable effects in our lives. The arrow symbolizes sudden and violent blows, unexpected persecution, words thrown like weapons, hasty judgments, betrayals that appear without warning. In spiritual warfare, these attacks are designed to destabilize us, to make us react in fear or anger, to pull us out of the center of God's will. They come publicly, visibly, like an arrow flying through the air in broad daylight. When we are struck by these arrows, whether through unfair criticism, slander, sudden losses, or direct spiritual confrontations, The temptation is to abandon our spiritual position of trust and respond with human weapons. But Psalm 91 calls us to a different kind of response, to remain under the shadow of the Almighty, trusting that no weapon formed against us will prosper. The pestilence that spreads in the darkness operates differently. It is insidious, silent, invisible. It represents waves of collective fear, spreading panic, manipulations that erode hope. While the arrow aims to wound quickly, the pestilence seeks to contaminate slowly and deeply, until the spirit becomes sick with unbelief and despair. We live in times when these pestilences are just as lethal as the arrows. Fear spread through media, normalized moral crises, social uncertainties sown to weaken people's faith. And the greatest danger is not the pestilence itself. It is allowing it into the heart, replacing trust with anxiety. Psalm 91, therefore, does more than comfort us. It awakens us. It reminds us that the battle is real and that our defense is not passive. Dwelling in the shelter of the Most High positions us under a spiritual covering that neutralizes arrows and repels pestilences, but it demands from us a posture of vigilance, active faith, and perseverance. Because while the world seeks natural solutions for visible problems, those who live under the shadow of the Almighty know that the real battles and the real victories begin and end in the spiritual realm. Understanding that the war is invisible, but its consequences are visible, teaches us to seek protection that goes beyond human logic. The arrows and pestilences are real, but the secret to remaining unshaken is not in the strength of our arms. It's in the place where the soul chooses to dwell, and it is precisely at this point that Psalm 91 reveals something precious. The shadow of the Most High is not just a shelter, it is a territory of revelation. Most people imagine a shadow as the absence of light, but spiritually, the shadow of the Most High is the place where God's light doesn't destroy, it transforms. It is the space where the intensity of the divine presence does not consume us, but molds us, realigns us, empowers us to see beyond what natural eyes can reach. To dwell in that shadow is much more than being protected from physical dangers. It is to be led to a state where the noise of the world loses its grip and the voice of God becomes audible. It's as if, by hiding in Him, our spiritual senses are sharpened, and what was once confusing begins to make sense, not through human logic, but by the Spirit's direction. The shadow of the Most High is where strategic instructions are released. There, the soul receives commands that are not given in the midst of chaos. They are silent warnings, specific directions, alerts that prepare the way to escape traps even before they are formed. Many stumble not from a lack of prayer, but from a lack of enough intimacy to hear these secret commands. This shadow is also the place where resistance is forged. When the psalmist says that 1,000 may fall at your side and 10,000 at your right hand, he is speaking of a scenario of widespread collapse, social, moral, and spiritual. But those who dwell in the shadow of the Most High do not fall with them, not because they are stronger, but because they are receiving instructions while others only react to panic. God always prepares His children in advance. He doesn't call us merely to survive attacks, but to walk above the circumstances, with heads held high, while everyone around is in despair. And this preparation happens in the shadow, in that intimate shelter where He teaches, corrects, comforts, and equips. Living under that shadow requires disconnecting from the overload of information the world offers and tuning the heart to catch the divine whisper. Those who dwell in the shadow of the Almighty are not caught off guard. They are guided, protected, and strengthened to remain standing, even in times of collective downfall. Because in God's shadow, we are not merely preserved, we are transformed to fulfill the purpose the world will never understand, but that heaven celebrates. After understanding what it means to dwell in the shadow of the Most High and to receive revelations that shape and strengthen our journey, one choice remains. Because listening is only the beginning. Responding is what transforms realities. If this message opened your eyes to something that once seemed hidden, if today you realize that Psalm 91 is far more than a comforting text, then don't let this revelation die in silence. There are truths that, once understood, demand a response. It's not enough to feel the impact. You must act. The shelter of the Most High is available now for those who choose not just to visit, but to live under His shadow. If in any way this word has echoed in your heart, I want to invite you to take the next step. Subscribe to the channel. Here, we uncover what many prefer to ignore. We don't offer polished speeches, but dive into the essence of spiritual truth that prepares, strengthens, and saves. By supporting this work, you not only grow spiritually, but also become part of a greater mission, preparing lives to withstand the days that have already begun. Now stop for a moment and think, do you know someone trapped in cycles of fear? People who face recurring illness without knowing there's an invisible battle being waged around them? Do you know those walking in spiritual confusion, seeking answers in places where they only find more despair? These people need to hear what the Spirit has revealed through the Word. Don't keep this truth to yourself. Share it. Send this message to your friends, to your family, to those who may be tired of empty promises and are searching for a real refuge. You may be the channel God uses to awaken someone from spiritual lethargy. Remember, Psalm 91 is not just for moments of crisis, it's a lifestyle. And the difference between falling or standing firm in evil days may lie in one simple choice: remaining under the shadow of the Most High or walking away from it. May the Lord strengthen your faith, renew your spirit, and may you walk each day under the light and protection of the One who never fails. And may this message reach many before the next arrow is released.